Well, it sounds almost too good to be true, doesn't it? One word that helps us to express changes, whether they are sudden or gradual. It helps us to communicate hypothetical situations, also to talk about things that happened where we're maybe not sure or even interested who was responsible, but we can also use it to make prognoses or predictions. And that all sounds pretty good, but maybe also a little confusing. Well, today we're pointing the spotlight at the verb werden, which is also the focus of one of this week's Wörter im Rampenlicht. So you can follow along in our textbook. Also, grüß Gott, hallo, ich bin Billy Badger und das ist Bausteine 2. Herzlich willkommen. Good news is, of course, that we can do lots of things with this one verb, but the bad news is perhaps that it's irregular in the present tense as well as the past tense. So in its various forms, it might look like this, or even this. Let's see if we can make some sense of it. On the whole, we are going to use it in one of two main ways, either as a verb all by itself without another verb, or as a kind of auxiliary verb with another verb at the end of the sentence. If we're using it just by itself in a sentence without another verb, then we're communicating the idea of a change, some kind of development. In English, we often do this in a number of ways with a number of different verbs, all of which can communicate some kind of change or even a development. And all of these are nicely represented by the verb werden in German. Let's look at some examples. Well, here in Australia, the days are getting longer and also just a little bit warmer. So I can say, for example, die Tage werden länger und es wird auch langsam wärmer. Or maybe, wird genervt. Another example, die Blätter werden grün. Or wird morgen 25. That's just our present tense. So if this person turned 25 yesterday, then of course we're going to need a past tense form. We'll use our two-part past tense. Ist gestern 25 geworden. But in more formal situations, you might see the simple past tense form. Wurde gestern 25. Mostly, of course, you're going to be using the two-part past tense. Looking at these trees, I can say, die Blätter sind schon grün geworden. So in many of these examples, we're using werden along with an adjective. But of course, we can also use it with a noun, like in these examples. Sie sind Eltern geworden. They became parents. Or möchte Architekt werden. He would like to become an architect. And as we can see in this last example, we use an article in the English, but generally not in the German. So we would say, for example, sie ist Ärztin geworden, and not sie ist eine Ärztin geworden. In each of these examples, we're just using our verb werden by itself or as the action verb, but we can use it also as an auxiliary verb in three main ways. Firstly, with other verbs in their infinitive form to communicate predictions. This is the future tense in German, but as we discussed in this video, we mostly just use the present tense for talking about future events. But for making prognoses or actual predictions, we often use the verb werden. A good example of this is perhaps with weather forecasts. For example, es wird morgen regnen. But we can also use it to talk about ourselves. In 10 Jahren werde ich in Wien wohnen. We've discussed this in a couple of videos, so you could check these out here if you need more information. To express hypothetical situations or events, we use much the same structure, but we just use the subjunctive version of werden, which is of course würden. And we've looked at this as well in a previous video, so you might find this video useful. Well, let's compare these two sentences. Ich werde in Wien wohnen. Here, you're making a prediction or maybe a definitive or emphatic statement about your intentions. But if we say, ich würde in Wien wohnen, then this is more of a hypothetical situation, or perhaps a conditional. You would live in Vienna. Either maybe if things were different or if certain conditions were met. Maybe if you could find a job or if you could afford it, that sort of thing. So in both situations, we're using the verb werden or its subjunctive form würden along with another verb in its infinitive form. And this is at the end of the sentence. As a hypothetical, you can use it with pretty much any verb except maybe sein, haben, and the modals. So we could have these examples. Ich würde gern Urlaub machen. I'd like to have a holiday. But it's also useful for giving advice, as you'll remember from this scene from a couple of weeks ago.
An deiner Stelle würde ich nicht schwimmen gehen. Das Wasser ist zu kalt.
An deiner Stelle würde ich nicht schwimmen gehen. Das Wasser ist viel zu kalt. Well, this brings us to the final, slightly unusual way of using the verb werden. Now, anytime we've used two verbs, it's either been with verbs like gehen, a modal verb, or werden, and using them as an auxiliary verb, together with the infinitive of a verb like in these examples. In each case, our second verb is just as you'd find it in the dictionary, right over there at the end of the sentence. But we've used two verbs also with the past tense, where we use sein and haben as our auxiliaries, and then with a participle on the end, often with that telltale ge prefix, like in these examples. But now we're going to use the participle with our verb werden instead. Let's look at this example. Here's the person, the mechanic, who works on our car. Now I can say, repariert unser Auto. This is an active sentence because we're saying who it is who's fixing the car. But often we just want to say that the car is being fixed, either because we don't know who's fixing it or maybe just because it's not important. So here we use a passive form with our verb werden. To do this, you just need the right form of werden along with the participle of the action verb. So I can say, unser Auto wird repariert. Our car's being fixed. Or maybe, der Müll wird abgeholt. Again, I don't know who's sitting in this truck collecting the rubbish. I just know that the trash is being collected. We're using our verb werden along with the participle of the separate verb abholen. Let's take one more example. Der Weizen wird geerntet. The wheat is being harvested. Now, I don't really know, or do I probably care, who's sitting in there. If we're in the past tense, things are, however, a little bit more complex, but it's still pretty straightforward. We can see that the structure is always the same, with the two-part past tense of the passive along with the participle of the action verb sandwiched there in the middle. So our sentences would become, unser Auto ist repariert worden, der Müll ist abgeholt worden und der Weizen ist geerntet worden. So for the most part, the passive in German is used much as it is in English, except it's used more often in some ways that we can't really do in English. In our English examples, there always seems to be a noun. The car is being repaired, the trash is being collected, the wheat is being harvested, and so on. This is not necessary in German. So check out these examples to see what I mean. Hier wird getanzt, or hier wird gelernt, or maybe hier wird gegessen. In each case, we're just communicating what's happening. There's no other noun in the sentence. And in English, you'd probably have to say something like, people are eating. So the German passive is a bit more flexible. Werden is certainly worth learning since we can do so much with it. We can use it for communicating changes or developments, making prognoses or predictions, for communicating hypothetical situations, or for talking about what is happening without saying who's doing it. If you'd like to find out more about the different tenses, I'd recommend watching this video next. Also das war's dann für diese Woche und auch für dieses Video. Danke fürs Zuschauen, alles Gute, auf Wiedersehen und tschüss. Tuk, 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 tuk.